Thank you for joining me here for the Daily Bread Bible Study. This is day 268 for Thursday, September 24th, 2020. We are focusing on the book of Habakkuk 1 through 3. So, Habakkuk, or I've heard it called Habakkuk, there is a fair amount that is unknown in this book of the Bible. The name Habakkuk could be a Hebrew term for embrace, or from the Assyrian tongue, the Akkadian, plant. So, not exactly sure where this term comes from. Bel and the Dragon mentions Habakkuk as well, going to feed Daniel. So, there is some biblical connection there. Likely, the time period as a guess, but around 600 BCE seems pretty safe. The context is really uncertain and not indicating too much of what Habakkuk is speaking to. The Chaldeans are mentioned here, warriors, but it also reads to me as being directed to another nation. So is that nation Babylon? Some scholars kind of debate and think that actually it might be directed towards the Assyrians. Either way you have it, I don't know that it matters too much for the point of what Habakkuk is trying to make. So the story is directed towards those who are oppressing God's people, and it's of another nation who is like a sea swallowing up and fishing out the people of God. And so the idea is that Habakkuk is calling for God to recognize this and help God's people. And so it's really about the people of God and those who are oppressing them. So let's dive into Habakkuk chapter 1. In Habakkuk 1, verse 1, the oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. Now the problem Habakkuk sees is in verse 3. Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack, justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, therefore judgment becomes perverted. So Habakkuk is noticing that the people of God really seem, righteous, and that the wicked are prospering over this. So the reason for this complaint is the term Chaldeans. So in Habakkuk 1:6, for I'm rousing the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. So the idea is that there is some participation of God with the Chaldeans, with this nation that is coming to overtake the people of God. Sounds very similar to the other prophets who predict that there will be both the destruction at the hand of other nations, and at the same time God will provide deliverance from the hand that God sends as well. So the theological complaint that Habakkuk brings up is, why do you allow this? Why do you allow the wicked to prosper over the good? So in verse 13, why do you look on the treacherous and are silent when the wicked swallow those more righteous than they? So Habakkuk thinks that they are righteous and is asking why the righteous have to suffer. Now, the Lord responds to Habakkuk's complaint against the Chaldeans, saying really to write the vision that he sees and receives from God plainly. The vision will come in its appointed time, and then speaks these words to the proud nation in verse 8. Because you have plundered many nations, all that survive of the peoples shall plunder you. Then in verse 12, the Chaldeans are portrayed as hungry and unjust, people quick to oppress and shed innocent blood, saying in verse 12, alas for you who build a town by bloodshed and found a city on iniquity. Moving on to Habakkuk 2, verse 9, the sins of the Chaldeans are noted, and even the walls would cry out against them. In verse 9, alas for you who get evil gain for your houses, setting your nest on high to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have fortified your life. The very stones will cry out from the wall. The stones, the one who witness everything that happens inside the walls, will speak out against the injustices that are happening because it is so profuse. Now, part of the problem with all of this, both I imagine with the Chaldeans and also with the Israelites, is the worship of idols, which Habakkuk reminds people that gold and silver cannot teach. These idols that are made out of gold and silver cannot instruct people, that they are just symbols made by human hands, and it's whatever significance the humans give to them, they cannot teach. Whereas God is outside of human hands and can instruct and teach beyond what humans are capable of. So in Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 1, it says, a prayer of the prophet Habakkuk according to Shigionoth. Ooh, I messed that one up. Well, anyways, the prayer remembers who God is, and the one who wandered with the Israelites in the desert of Paran. So we see that, God brought them out of slavery in Egypt. They wandered in the wilderness through part of Paran. This could be, Teman is referenced, which could be connected with the Edomites, the longtime opponents and, family relatives, the family feud, I should say, connected with Esau and Jacob producing the Israelites. So that is referenced as well too, but even still, this is a God who's been there with them. And so the force of the army, presumably these Chaldeans, was strong, but God was stronger. And so our God is also a God of deliverance. In Habakkuk 3:12, in fury you trod the earth, in your anger you trampled nations. You came forth to save your people, to save your anointed. You crushed the head of the wicked house, laying it bare from foundation to roof, Selah. So this nation gets crushed and destroyed. So exactly who this nation is, right? It could have been the Assyrians, because the Assyrians in 720 BCE sacked Assyria, and then they got destroyed. And the Chaldeans, if it's around 600, have not yet been sacked, but timing is kind of strange here and unknown. So I'll let you come to whatever conclusion you would like to assess there. But moving on to Habakkuk 3:14, it says, you pierced with their own arrows the head of his warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter us. So the idea is really that this nation that had a lot of arrogance would probably be the best word. Audacity is an even better word. This nation that had a lot of audacity, had no respect for God, was appointed by God to do God's purposes, and yet at the same time, that also meant their own destruction after they became too haughty within themselves. So, in closing, Habakkuk, the prophetic prayer ends with two thoughts, really. Both are valuable. So, in Habakkuk 3:16, I wait quietly for the day of calamity to come upon the people who attacked us. The idea is that whenever God's people suffer, that they need some sort of deliverance, and part of that is looking for God to show up. That means taking down and tearing down the existing power structures that have come in and oppose, justice and oppress God's people, God's righteous individuals, and do that unjustly. So an end to all of that. And then Habakkuk 3:18, I will rejoice in the Lord, I will exult in the God of my salvation. So ultimately, Habakkuk waits because he knows God is trustworthy. that God will deliver him from whatever adversity and challenges, even if it seems like the unjust might prosper for a time. He hears from God that there will be a time where that will end and reckoning will happen. So as you sit in suffering and patience, may you endure as you know that God will restore justice to you, that God will treat you mercifully, that God will again bring good to the people who are righteous, and it will all be in a brief moment. So I hope you receive righteousness and justice soon, and I look forward to discussing more of these minor prophets next time.